Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are absolutely delighted to have you here on this very special occasion. My name is Carol Campbell. I am the head of Murray House School of Education and Sport here at the University of Edinburgh. So for those of you who are visiting our campus for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who are familiar with our campus, welcome back. And of course, we have colleagues and students in the room as well tonight. When we work in academic life and universities, one of the highest accomplishments is to achieve the status of being a full professor. And it's my absolute delight that we get to celebrate Sarah McGeown tonight as Professor McGeown. And so congratulations to Sarah. This is a special event. And of course, Sarah's not only a professor, she's a professor at Murray House, and I might be a little bit biased, but we are the #1 school of education in Scotland and one of the top in the world. So let me tell you, this is no small achievement that you have made. So it is a night to celebrate, and we're here to celebrate and enjoy. So I brought my glasses yesterday, so if this starts to go a bit wrong, please excuse me, but I do need them to read. So the title of Sarah's lecture is The Power and Pleasure of Reading, How Books Can Engage, Empower and Enrich Us. It's my honour to give you Sarah's extensive expertise and background. Sarah was born in Aberdeen, here in Scotland, the first in her family to go to university. She holds an MA Honours in Psychology and an MSc by Research in Psychology, both from the University of Aberdeen, and a PhD in Psychology from the University of Hull. Immediately after gaining her PhD, Sarah started as a lecturer in psychology at the University of Hull. We'll forgive you for that, Sarah. You came back. And was there from 2008 to 2012, before joining Murray House School of Education and Sport as a lecturer in developmental psychology from January 2013. She was promoted to senior lecturer in 2018, and then to personal chair in literacy, psychology and education in August of last year. And that's what we're here to celebrate tonight. Sarah's research career has evolved over the last 2 decades, beginning as a cognitive psychologist utilizing experimental research methods to study early reading development, to a qualitative researcher adopting participatory approaches and research practice partnerships to understand readers' experiences with books. To date, Sarah has over 70 research articles published, and in addition to numerous book chapters, 2 teacher mini-books and co-edited 2 books, including the recent Reading for Pleasure, International Perspectives, which was published just last month by Routledge. While Sarah's research has spanned a diverse range of topics and methodological approaches, her most significant contribution to academic knowledge and thinking has been with the reading research literature, specifically understanding the causes and consequences of reading motivation and engagement. And she will talk about that this evening. Beyond this, Sarah is also known as an advocate for research to practice partnerships. And to all of you who are not from universities or academics, but are community partners and friends and family, a special welcome to all of you for being here. She's committed to ensuring her research is relevant and meaningful to those whom it may benefit. And so collaborative research with organisations, professionals and individuals beyond the academic world is central to Sarah's work. Sarah's career highlights include her research partnerships with different organisations. In particular, she'd like to thank the Scottish Book Trust, the National Literacy Trust, and the literacy team at Education Scotland for their continued contribution to her ideas and thinking, which have consistently shaped the research she plans to share this evening. She'd also like to thank World Book Day, Book Trust, and SILIPS for recent collaborations, and she looks forward to working with them all in the future. She's also celebrating that she mentors and supports early career PhD researchers. So tonight, Sarah wants to thank all of you for being here. I'll let Sarah do that in her own words rather than me reading that to you. But please join me in what is a real highlight of an academic career. And I'm just so proud of you, Sarah, and to be part of this celebration. So thank you, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much for that warm welcome. And thank you all for being here today, either online or in person within the room. And can I just check that my mic is working? I think it is, perfect. So we're here today to celebrate the power and pleasures of reading, looking at how books can engage, empower, and enrich us. And I have quite a lot planned for us tonight, so I'm just going to make a start now. I'm going to start off talking about the Reading and Wellbeing Project. This was a large-scale qualitative project funded by the Leverhulme Trust, which examined readers' perceptions of the relationship between their fiction book reading and their well-being. I'm then going to move on to talk about the concept of reading engagement. This is a concept which has been preoccupying a lot of my thinking recently, and I'll talk about how I feel this concept is central to our understanding of readers' reading experiences and outcomes. I'll then move on to focus on reading motivation and share details of a project funded by the Nuffield Foundation called Love to Read, which sought to increase children's motivation to read books. Following this, I'll talk about research practice partnerships, a methodological approach which has characterized many of my projects over the last few years. And finally, I'll share details of projects from the Literacy Lab, celebrating many of the projects, both past and present, that have been led by a number of early career researchers within the lab. And while I won't have time to go into detail of all these projects, if you are interested in learning about any of these or who's been involved, please do feel free to look at the website for more information. But let's start first of all with reading and wellbeing. I'd like to thank everyone that was involved in this project, our project partners and all the other contributors. And for this and all other projects, there's details of who's involved on the website. As I said, this was a large-scale qualitative research project looking at how fiction book reading supports well-being from readers' perspectives. And it took a lifespan approach as well. So we carried out interviews with children, young people, adults, and older adults. And this lifespan approach to studying reading and well-being is actually quite novel. So a lot of research to date has tended to focus on specific age categories, and a lot of the research has been with children and young people specifically. But what a lot of quantitative research has shown, for example, with children and young people, is that there's a positive, albeit weak, relationship between our book reading and well-being. And this is perhaps unsurprising. At a population-based level, you'd expect some people to have positive experiences with books, but for others, reading may be anxiety-provoking, stressful. Some may find reading boring or may even be indifferent to the idea of reading as well. And so our study aimed to take a qualitative approach. It was not intended to be representative of the population, but rather to carry out interviews with people who enjoy reading and who consider themselves readers, to understand and develop a deepened understanding of the different ways in which they felt that fiction book reading had contributed to their well-being. It was a qualitative project, but it was quite large in terms of its scale. And these were the 4 different age groups that we interviewed as part of the project. Now, the term well-being is actually being used increasingly within the reading research literature, but often it's poorly defined, and the research is not necessarily sufficiently situated within the well-being literature. Now, well-being is a complex concept, but research on well-being tends to focus from one of 2 general perspectives. There's the hedonistic, which looks at the presence of positive emotions, such as feelings of happiness, enjoyment, and the absence of negative emotions. And then there's a eudaimonic approach to well-being as well, which looks at finding meaning in life, self-realization, fulfilling one's potential, feeling a sense of autonomy or mastery over one's life, and feeling a sense of positive relatedness or connection to others. And so within the Reading and Wellbeing Project, we looked at aspects from both hedonistic and eudaimonic traditions, looking at how fiction books can foster feelings of positive affect or positive emotions from a hedonistic perspective, and looking at the concepts of connection and personal growth from a eudaimonic perspective. So I plan to share some of our research findings now. It is impossible to do justice to the full breadth of our research findings or to talk specifically about each life stage. So what I've tried to do instead is to integrate findings from across the lifespan and to focus on each of these concepts in detail, just to give a little bit more nuance and depth of understanding into these different aspects of well-being. So what we found from readers across the lifespan is that fiction book reading can elicit a wide range of emotions. And these are just some of the emotions here. These differ in saliency. Sometimes they can be quite deep and sustained, but at other times these emotions can be quite fleeting. Some readers report that even negative emotions can be enjoyable. For example, sometimes we enjoy feelings of sadness or tension within books, and actually some readers actually seek these out. And while we were interested in readers' emotional experiences while they were reading, what we also found as well was that readers often have certain emotional states prior to reading. And we know ourselves, sometimes we feel in the mood for a book or in the mood for a certain type of book. And so while we focused on how reading can, and also while we focused on how reading can support well-being, what we also found is that sometimes you just need to be well enough or have a positive sense of well-being in order to read. As you'll come to see later, reading is a cognitively effortful activity, and sometimes we need to feel well enough in ourselves in order to engage in that. For some readers, they spoke about finding solace in books during difficult times, whereas for others, they just said they found it too hard to read when things were difficult for them. And in addition to emotions before reading, readers also spoke about feeling emotions after reading. For example, that lingering emotional effect after reading a book, or as a book is recalled to their mind at a later date. Now, the emotions that they spoke about were sometimes elicited directly as a result of the book content. For example, as the characters, settings, or story events made them feel certain things. But books can also cue personal memories and the emotions associated with these. And as readers, we bring so much of ourselves to the books that we read. We bring our interests, our dispositions, our life experiences, our reflections in ways which can really shape and enhance our reading experiences. We found that readers really differ in their disposition to seek out or engage in emotionally salient content. So for some, having quite deep emotional experiences was quite important in their fiction book reading, but that wasn't the case for all. And I think it's really important to stress that as readers, we look for different types of experiences in the books that we read. As I'm talking here, these may not reflect your reading experiences at all. And it's just important to recognize that there are lots of different ways to enjoy books. And readers also spoke about the books that they read, the content of them sometimes eliciting different types of emotions, or the quality of the author's writing influencing the emotional impact of a book. And so what I'm going to do now is just share some of the personal reading experiences in relation to positive effect. As I've said, these are just some insights from across the lifespan. It's not possible to do justice to all of our qualitative findings, but hopefully this exemplifies some of the points that I've just made. And I'll give you a little bit of time just to read through these now. And so what you can hopefully see is that readers often spoke about positive emotions arising, sometimes as a result as well of feelings of connection to story content or to characters. And so with this, I'm going to now move on to the eudaimonic aspects of well-being, looking specifically at how reading may be able to support feelings of connection. Now, due to time restrictions this evening, I'm only going to focus on the way in which a reader's individual or personal reading experiences fostered feelings of connection and not talk about shared reading experiences with others. So through their personal reading experiences, readers often spoke about feelings of connection to the fiction world. For example, feeling connected to characters, particularly when they saw aspects of their own lives, experiences, or identities reflected in what they read. And for some, reading was about engaging in personally meaningful content and finding that resonance with a character. Some children and young people sometimes spoke about seeing characters within books that they may want to be friends with, or adults or older adults often spoke about feeling a sense of care for some of the characters within books. Whereas others spoke about feeling a sense of connection to settings or locations, particularly where they felt that this was an accurate representation of reality and was perhaps a setting or location that was familiar to them. And readers sometimes also spoke about feeling connection to story events, particularly where they may have resonated with their own life experiences, or if it's something that they could have imagined happening to them. But beyond feeling connected to the fiction world, readers also spoke about how fiction book reading had fostered their connection to real-life others, both known and unknown others within their life. So readers spoke about being able to better understand those people within their own lives, whether it was their friends, their classmates, or family members, both past and present, and maybe being able to better understand their attitudes or their perspectives or their behaviors as a result of something that they've read within the book. But beyond this, reading can also introduce us to people and cultures that we may never experience. And through reading, readers also spoke about better understanding other people as well, those unknown others that they may never meet, but actually having a better insight into the lives that they were experiencing. And again, I'll just give you an opportunity to read some of the different quotes in relation to connection. And so what you can see is readers talking about seeing their own experiences reflected in what they read, or sometimes gaining insight into inner worlds. And I think our research is providing unique insights across the lifespan into the ways in which books can elicit feelings of connection to help readers maybe better understand themselves and others. And with this, I'm now going to move on to the concept of personal growth. There were similarities and differences across the lifespan in terms of how readers felt that reading supported their personal growth. And like I said, I'll just integrate and share some of the findings here. So readers often spoke about feelings of intellectual or educational development. So children and young people maybe spoke about benefits to their vocabulary or their reading or writing skills, whereas older adults were maybe more likely to talk about feeling more educated as a result of reading. And this focus on education or intellectual development has actually been a kind of key focus of a lot of quantitative research in this area, which has demonstrated that book reading, and specifically fiction book reading, is beneficial for the development of reading and language skills. But beyond intellectual and educational development, reading was also found to support people's understanding of themselves. Children and young people gave examples of how it had supported their moral development, provided important life lessons, supported their future aspirations, and as I said earlier, maybe gave them a better understanding of themselves, better levels of self-awareness or self-understanding, and maybe even a stronger sense of belonging. Whereas adults across the lifespan also sometimes spoke about themselves and maybe seeing themselves more clearly through the books that they'd read. As I've highlighted already, across the lifespan, we saw examples of readers talking about fiction books helping to support their understanding of others and giving examples of benefits to both cognitive and affective aspects of empathy. But beyond this, fiction book reading was also seen to expand readers' life experiences, giving them insight into cultures, settings, peoples, places that they haven't experienced, that then they knew that they were never going to experience. And I'll illustrate this again now with some of the quotes from our study. And I'll just give you a moment to read these as well. And I particularly like this quote about the quieter arena of reading, because I think we're increasingly being exposed to text which may provide instant gratification, that is immediate, but perhaps only short-term satisfaction, over text which maybe provide longer-term benefits, such as books. So in order to summarize, fiction books offer a vast range of rich and diverse experiences. As I've said, if you haven't seen your experiences reflected in that, that doesn't mean that they're not as valuable. We all look for different things from books, and their focus on positive affect, connection, and personal growth has really orientated our framing to thinking about these readers' experiences. But what I have learned is that as readers, we bring so much of ourselves to the books that we read, both in the choices that we make about what we read, but also how we read as well, with our interests, our knowledge, our past experiences, our identities, really shaping and enhancing our reading experiences. But I think that, and one of the key things that I've been thinking about recently in relation to this project is this idea of engagement, and that in order for the wellbeing benefits to be realised, we need to engage deeply with the books that we read. And so for this, I'm going to move on now to talk about the concept of engagement. So reading engagement is a commonly used term within my field. It has been used frequently and it has been used widely. But despite its ubiquitous use, it tends to be something which is poorly defined and has often suffered from a lack of conceptual clarity in terms of what we mean by reading engagement. And I'll be completely honest, I've been studying reading engagement for about 10 years now and I've given it very little thought until now. And now it seems to be all I can think about. So I'd really like to thank the authors of the systematic review for really inspiring me to think a lot more deeply about the concept of reading engagement. And since the systematic review came out, I've been working with one of the authors of this to develop a reading engagement scale and also to think about the concept of reading engagement in a bit more detail. And I just want to share some of where my thinking is now. So the systematic review of reading engagement highlighted that it's not just about behavioural engagement, which is what we tended to look at reading behaviours, but actually there's 4 distinct dimensions of reading engagement, which are distinct but interconnected, that of behavioural, cognitive, affective, and social engagement. And so what I'm going to do now is talk about each of these concepts within the context of books and placing the reader at the centre. So when the term reading engagement is used in the research literature, in the way that I tend to use it as well, it's primarily used to thinking about behavioural engagement, that is time spent reading. And as I said, there's a considerable body of research highlighting the benefits of book reading, particularly fiction book reading, for the development of language and literacy skills. But reading is also a cognitively effortful activity, whether it's a young child in the early stages of learning to read or an adult as well. As readers, we have to invest cognitive effort and attention in what we read as well. And we need to implement a diverse range of cognitive strategies in order to support our comprehension. We can also think about the emotional or affective engagement, affective aspects of engagement. And I've shared in the Reading and Wellbeing Project some of the positive emotional experiences that readers can have when they read. But readers also have quite negative experiences as well. As I said, feelings of stress or anxiety, of boredom. And so much of my research is around supporting children and young people to find the kinds of books that they'll enjoy, so they have positive affective experiences, but also want to invest that cognitive effort to make sure that they do read. And social engagement is about extending beyond the individual act of being a reader and talking about books with others, sharing and recommending books as well. And in doing so, there's opportunities for them to extend their reading experiences and learn from others. So as I've said, this model of reading engagement looks specifically at books and it places the reader particularly at the centre. But what I want to do now is start to think about how different text types may be able to shift or alter our reading engagement. So we can think, for example, about the behavioural affordances of different text types. So for example, comparing long versus short form or print versus digital. For example, with digital text, they often offer more interactive reading behaviours than you would necessarily get from a book. We can also think about the cognitive affordances of different text types as well. So the process of reading a book is underpinned and develops certain cognitive skills. So there's a lot of focus on, for example, vocabulary, working memory, or inference skills in relation to book reading. Whereas, for example, if we're reading online, what we're often doing is skimming and scanning text very quickly, rapidly appraising the quality or the relevance of the information for our needs, and sometimes integrating or synthesizing information across web pages in order to suit our interests or our goals. And this text type and our intentions behind it depend on and develop very different cognitive skills to those that are required for reading books. And we can also think about the emotional or affective affordances of different text types too. And I think it's important now more than ever that we think about how we can create personally enjoyable, meaningful and enriching experiences with different text types, but particularly digital ones, given their ubiquitous use within our lives. And finally, we can think about how technologies are shaping our social reading experiences. For example, algorithms rather than humans are making recommendations to us, and AI has more recently become a member of our social network. These technologies are now key actors in our reading experiences and outcomes, shaping our reading engagement, not just our social reading engagement, but behavioral, cognitive, and affective as well. And I think it's essential that we do all that we can to ensure that these rapid changes in technology do, as much as possible, have a positive influence on our intellectual, social, and emotional development. So in terms of reading engagement, I think it's actually quite exciting to find a concept that I can think about in depth. I do think our understanding of it is still in its infancy, but I do think it's actually central as well to our understanding of reading experiences and outcomes. And the more I think about reading engagement, the more interesting it becomes. I also think that different disciplinary perspectives have quite a lot to offer in terms of our thinking of this concept. So I'm a psychologist and I tend to come at things from a psychological perspective. And so as a psychologist, I might be interested in the reader and the skills and dispositions being developed by or underpinned by these different aspects of engagement. But we can also look at this from a very different perspective as well. For example, a socio-material perspective, which sees literacy as co-constructed through the relationships between people, texts, technologies, and their environment. And I think it's fascinating to think about what literacy and engagement look like when it's both shaped and shared between human and non-human actors. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit in thinking about engagement because we need to move back to reading motivation, that drive or desire to want to read, because this precedes engagement. And so I'm now going to move on to how we can motivate reading, but particularly book reading, because this is something that I care very deeply about. So when I shared details of the Reading and Wellbeing project at the beginning, I hope I did stress that our participants were not representative of the population, because actually in the context in which we're currently in, there's evidence of continued declines in reading enjoyment and engagement among children and young people within the UK, and actually the same is true of adults. For 20 years now, the National Literacy Trust in the UK has been collecting data on children and young people's reading attitudes and the diversity of their reading activities as well. And their research has provided really important insights into trends in reading attitudes and practices. And this most recent report, authored by Christina Clark and her colleagues, from last year, shows where we are at present. And what I hope you can see here is a steady decline from 2016 until the present day, marked only by an exception in 2021, which was most likely a result of lockdown, which resulted in quite abrupt and significant changes both to our lives and to our lifestyles as well. And so this decline in reading engagement has led to this kind of policy and practice commitment towards supporting reading for pleasure. What we're finding in the UK is also being reflected internationally as well. So the Progress in International Reading Literacy study, this is an independent worldwide research study which takes place every 5 years. It provides data about trends in reading literacy over time. It started in 2001 and its most recent cycle was 2021. And to give you an understanding of the scale of pearls, in the last cycle, 57 countries participated. And they measure reading attitudes in terms of reading enjoyment and out-of-school reading. And I think that this headline sort of says it all. In the majority of the countries that participated in pearls in that most recent cycle, there were declines in both students, but also parents' attitudes towards reading. And a copy of these slides will be uploaded to the website afterwards, and there's access to all the links as well if people would like to read further. So of all the research that I've carried out to date, I'm probably best known for my research around motivation and motivating book reading in particular. And a conceptual review of reading motivation defined it as the drive to read resulting from an individual's beliefs about, attitudes towards, and goals for reading. And I started off, first of all, as a quantitative researcher, and then more recently I've been doing qualitative research, looking at both the causes and consequences of children and young people's reading motivation. And exploring the causes, I've been looking at how personal and contextual factors can influence reading motivation. And then looking at the consequences, I've been looking at the impact of children and young people's reading motivation on their reading choices or attainment outcomes. Some of this research was published in a mini book back in 2013, where I summarised the body of work, primarily quantitative, looking at the relationship between reading motivation, engagement and attainment, and also looking at demographic differences and trends in relation to this. And then in 2021, with Catherine Wilkinson at the Scottish Book Trust, who I have to say has been the most wonderful research partner, our mini book focused on the benefits of reading motivation and engagement, before sharing principles and practices to support children's motivation and engagement in reading. And some of the principles and ideas from this mini book actually underpinned a project that I plan to share now. So Love to Read was a huge team effort. There were a lot of people involved, and I'd like to thank everyone for their contribution to this. Love to Read is an example of a research practice partnership with a co-design element within it, and I'll be moving on to talking about research practice partnerships too. But the aim of Love to Read was to co-create and evaluate a programme to increase children's reading motivation and engagement in response to this decline that we were seeing in reading attitudes. And in developing the programme, it was really important that it was underpinned by 3 sources of information. The first, research, that this was a research-informed programme. Now, the reading motivation and engagement, or reading for pleasure research literature, is actually a wonderful research literature, but it is vast and it is complex. It is informed by different disciplinary perspectives, vastly different methodological approaches, and there's numerous different motivational frameworks as well. And it took me a long time to get my head around and navigate this literature. And so identifying these 6 principles was really my way of identifying what are the key messages from this literature that I would want to communicate to teachers in order to best support their practice. And I'll move on to talk about the 6 principles in just a minute. But from this research review, we identified 6 principles and we shared these with children to find out about their perspectives and experiences of these principles and ways to support reading for pleasure within school too. And the reason for speaking with children is because a lot of the time educational programs or resources are created for children, but actually without any child consultation. So it was really important that we heard their voices and they were included within this. We then took what the research said and what the children said, and we shared this with teachers and professionals. And over a period of several months online, we worked with a group of teachers to co-create the programme, drawing upon their professional and pedagogical expertise, and also involving the input of our other partners on the project. And then after this, after the programme had been developed, we evaluated it in a feasibility study, evaluating implementation and effectiveness. This was a study across 3 sites in the UK with 18 classrooms and 425 children in total. What I'm going to do now is focus on the 6 principles underpinning the Love to Read project. But if you're interested in learning anything more about this project, the paper is under review at the moment, but there is a link to the preprint that no one can see, but you'll see it in the slides at a later point. So these are the 6 principles that underpin the programme: those of access, choice, time, connection, social, and success. And due to time restrictions, I won't be able to cover all of these, so I'm just going to focus on 3, that of choice, connection, and success. And just to say that when discussing these, I'll be providing examples of teacher and child quotes as we embedded these principles within practice. I'd like to stress that these quotes are not intended to, nor do they evidence programme effectiveness, but rather they're aiming to give scope and a bit of insight into the scope of these principles and the types of attitudes, behaviours and skills that we were seeking to influence. So the first principle is that of choice. It's about children needing to have choice over their independent activities, schools having the structure to facilitate choice, but children also having the skills to ensure that they're able to make good reading choices. And this is underpinned by research literature highlighting the importance of autonomy and agency within reading. But we also recognise that while in school, children are often taught the skills to read or strategies to comprehend, they're actually very rarely, if at all, taught how to choose books. And so during the programme, there was explicit teaching in book choice, increased opportunities for children to spend time choosing books, and additional support or scaffolding for children to develop the skills to find books that they would enjoy. So in these quotes now, just to say in all of the quotes, if it's a darker coloured box, it's from a teacher, and if it's a lighter coloured box, it's from a child. So if you just look at the teacher quotes first, and then read the children's ones. And so what I hope you can see here is that teachers started to recognize that children didn't necessarily know how to choose books, particularly the less experienced readers. Perhaps they were now taking longer to choose books, they were maybe more likely to swap them, but they were more likely to find books that they engaged with. And children started to discover maybe new genres that they hadn't discovered before, were able to articulate skills in book choice, and were reading more as a result. And actually a lot of our quotes from the concept of time were talking about how they're reading more because they finally found books that they actually like. In terms of the principle of connection, this was about children being able to access and choose books and book reading activities which are personally relevant and relevant to their own reading goals. And as I've said earlier, books offer all types of reading experiences. We all have different purposes and reasons for wanting to read. So it's about encouraging children to think about what type of experience do they want from the books that they read, and then giving them the skills to choose that. As part of the programme, we encouraged teachers to look at their school book provision and the extent to which it reflected the interests, lives and abilities of their school community. We also encouraged children to reflect more while they were reading as well, and through developing their skills in book choice, being able to find books which better connected with their own goals for reading. So again, what I'd like you to do is read the teacher quotes in the dark first, followed by the children's quotes in the lighter box. And just to give a little bit of context to this first quote, sometimes when children were reading for enjoyment in class, the teacher would play like calming and relaxing music. So this first quote is a child going up to complain because he was reading a chase scene and it didn't match the relaxing music that was being played at that time. And so hopefully from these quotes, you can see teachers illustrating how children were becoming more emotionally aware of their reading experiences and maybe connecting with others over books, whereas children were giving examples of maybe connecting more deeply with the characters in the story world and maybe becoming more immersed in what they were reading and more reflective as they read as well. And finally, the principle of success is about children need to have a range of rich and diverse positive reading experiences. They need to be able to set meaningful goals for themselves and recognize their growing success as readers. And this is underpinned by theories and research highlighting the importance of positive expectations of success and competency beliefs as well. So in this programme, we encouraged activities which broaden children's and teachers' conceptualisation of what it means to be a successful or a good reader, so that all children were able to see ways in which they could and were already good readers. So being a successful reader wasn't just about having good reading skills. It was about having the skills to choose a book that you liked, knowing different types of genres, choosing to read more outside of school, enjoying reading, finding out something new from a book, being more confident talking about books with others, using your imagination more when you read. So we got them to think about all the different ways in which they could be good readers. And so it was a much more kind of broader and inclusive view of this. And again, the teachers, first of all, are in darker, and then the children are in the lighter box. And just say SEN stands for Special Educational Needs. It's a term used in England. So I think teachers really recognise the importance of a kind of more expansive and inclusive view of what it means to be a good reader and the benefits that this could have. Whereas we found that a programme that focuses on reading enjoyment and engagement can show children that reading can be something that they do for pleasure and something that they want to do in their own time. Full details of the project can be found here. All of the projects that we do are aligned with open research practices as well. So if you're interested in any of our pre-registrations or measures, you can find them here. And following on from Love to Read, we developed Love to Read libraries with library professionals and library and literacy organisations. And this is a short guide with activities and resources that can be easily adopted into library settings as well, so that librarians and other staff have access to the same type of research insights that staff have working within schools. And as a result of giving talks around the Love to Read project, and what it was also an opportunity for me to do was to highlight the methodological approach that we were using as well. As I said, this was a research practice partnership from the outset, and also had a co-design element within it as we worked closely with the education community. And as a result of this project, I was invited to give talks and training and write research articles on research practice partnerships. And it's this that I'm now going to go and talk about now. So research practice partnerships refers to collaborative research, which draws upon the knowledge, expertise, and experience from those working within research and practice. There has been quite a common and dominant narrative within education about the importance of academic research informing practice. And I do think that this is really important, that the research that we carry out within universities has a positive impact within education. But we can also completely switch the narrative and talk about practice informing research. That is, the interests and priorities of those in practice informing our research agendas, where university-led research is informed by real-world educational issues and challenges. And so what I tend to talk about most frequently is about connecting research and practice, about a kind of relationship or discussion between both in planning and also in terms of conducting research. And this is illustrated through the Local Network, which I co-founded with Lynn Duncan at the University of Dundee in 2019. And we're a group of researchers, education and literacy professionals who've met monthly for several years now to share our work, our interests, and to talk about literacy and language from our own perspectives. And I'd like to thank Lynn and all of the Local members for the contributions that they've made to my thinking and knowledge of literacy and practice within Scotland. It's also illustrated within the UKLA Participatory Approaches to Literacy Research Special Interest Group that we created. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with participatory approaches, it's an approach which, in our SIG anyway, was really about centering children and young people's voices in research, so that research is more closely aligned with their lives, with their interests and priorities, but also that it's carried out more closely in collaboration with them. And in establishing the SIG, we sought to create a community of those working across a diverse range of settings, universities, but also national community organisations or schools, so we could share and develop our experience in relation to participatory approaches. And I'd like to thank Charlotte Webber and Mel Ramdarshan Bode for their contribution to the SIG initially, and also to Sam Holston and Susan Chapman, who'll be continuing with the SIG alongside Charlotte. And as I said at the beginning, through doing this work, I also had the opportunity to contribute some of my own writing and thinking behind this. So in 2023, I published, the Psychology of Education Review, published an open dialogue in which I led on an article making a case for why I thought we needed a methodological shift in how we did research. Within it, I spoke about some of the benefits of doing research practice partnerships, but also some of the methodological considerations as well. For example, the time required to initiate and sustain research practice partnerships characterized by trust and clear communication. Or the fact that the interests and priorities of those in research and practice may be dissimilar to each other, and compromises may need to be made in ways which hopefully satisfy both those in research and practice and lead to improved research questions and outcomes as well. And from this initial open dialogue article, we had 8 contributions, and these are from leading researchers and educators, both nationally and internationally, who are each in different ways working at the intersection of research and practice. They reflected on my initial article, shared some of their own experiences of working in this way as well, and some of their own knowledge of this work. And then in the closing article, what I did was summarize their contributions and started to think about enablers for change as well. What are the types of things that we need to put into place in order for RPPs to be embedded optimally? For example, the types of infrastructure that would be needed to facilitate and sustain research practice partnerships, particularly given the diversity of actors within education, or the funding that would need to be required to ensure there's time and resources to achieve intended outcomes, but also funding which promotes equitable ways of working. And more recently, I've been working with Simon Scholen, who's a leading researcher in this area and based in Sweden. And we've been considering key drivers and enablers across a number of different European contexts. So providing examples from Scotland, England, Sweden, Norway, and Germany, we've been reflecting on the importance of 4 key enablers: infrastructure, funding, training, and incentives, and the ways in which these need to be implemented in order to introduce, embed, and sustain research practice partnerships in ways which optimize our research processes and our outcomes as well, while at the same time ensuring mechanisms are in place to critically evaluate whether there is added value and what that added value may be. And then more recently, I've been thinking about research practice partnerships within the context of the REF. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the REF, this is a UK-wide assessment of research quality, which informs the allocation of public funding for universities' research. I think that the REF has actually incentivized research practice partnerships, specifically through its focus on impact and its increased weighting on impact, but also more recently through a shift to engagement and impact as well. But I think that beyond engagement and impact, RPPs also have implications for other REF components. For example, contribution to knowledge and understanding. I think when assessing our outputs, it's important to think about what does methodological rigor look like within the context of a research practice partnership, as opposed to more traditional or basic research led only by a researcher. And within people, culture, and environments, how are research practice partnerships shaping our research ecosystems as we increasingly work beyond the boundaries of universities to both inform and conduct our research? And I also think it's essential that we acknowledge the intellectual contribution that those beyond our universities are making to our research. And I think REF is one area where I think this needs to be considered. So I've spoken about reading and wellbeing. We've taken a kind of qualitative and lifespan approach to understanding how reading can support wellbeing. I've spoken about reading engagement and why I think that's central to our understanding of readers' reading experiences and outcomes. Then moved on to talk about reading motivation and so why it's more important now more than ever that we do all we can to motivate book reading. And then shared some of my current thinking in relation to research practice partnerships. I'm now going to move on to talk about the Literacy Lab and share some of the projects that we've been carrying out in recent years, and then talk about future thinking in this area. So I established the Literacy Lab in 2022 to create a home for many of the different projects that we were carrying out at the University of Edinburgh. And I'd like to thank all members of the Literacy Lab, all the early career researchers, but also the practice partners as well, who've made the last few years of my career the most enjoyable and professionally rewarding as well. What I plan to do now is to share several of the projects from within the lab. I don't have time to share all, but there are details of all of them on our website. And so please have a look if you're interested in any in more detail. So the first project is the Reading and Wellbeing Project, and I'd like to give a huge thanks to Nicola Curry, who led on a lot of brilliant work for this project. The Reading and Wellbeing Project was the first to extend beyond children and young people to look at adults and older adults reading. And it's been absolutely fascinating to learn about adults' reading experiences. And this is something that I'm interested in doing more of in the future, both understanding and supporting reading experiences across the lifespan. Our reading engagement work is continuing. So the reading engagement scale that we published is being used by researchers and professionals with requests to have it translated into different languages as well. We've recently had data collection completed in Singapore and in the US as well. And I'd like to thank Chin-Yi Lo and Kristen Conradi-Smith for leading on this. And this will be compiled alongside our UK data to look at cross-cultural similarities and differences in terms of the relationship between reading motivation, engagement, and skill using these 4 different dimensions. In terms of the Love to Read project, I'd like to thank Emily Oxley for her wonderful work on the project. With the Love to Read project, we co-created a program and evaluated it in a feasibility study. But further work is needed in order to robustly evaluate this program before making any recommendations on its use. And I'd like to thank Miriam McBreen, who's leading on current thinking in terms of a randomized control trial to do this. Drawing upon the Nuffield Foundation Love to Read project, the Education Endowment Foundation funded Love to Read Reception. This project was led by Jamie Lingwood at Liverpool Hope University, where we created and piloted an age-appropriate version of the programme for reception classes. And the aim of this programme was really to nurture an early interest and enjoyment in books, words and stories alongside children's phonics instruction. And details of this project can be found on the website. Meanwhile, the Young People's Reading Project explored teenagers' reading motivation and engagement, led by Charlotte Webber and funded by the ESRC Collaborative Studentship in collaboration with the Scottish Book Trust. This project really centred young people's voices to understand the motivators and barriers to their volitional reading. And the Neurodiversity and Narrative Fiction Project looked at neurodivergent representation within fiction books. This project represents the personal and professional interest of my own, in addition to many members of the research team. In this project, we interviewed neurodivergent young people to understand their thoughts on what good representation would look like, while also exploring their perceptions of the benefits and potential harms of neurodivergence within fiction. I'd like to thank all of our project partners who are involved in this, but a special thanks to Elena Santi and Charlotte Weber for their work on this project. And this was funded by Challenge Investment Fund. While Maggie Chan's PhD research looked at disability representation within picture books. In particular, she was interested in the relationship between images and text in picture books and how these may shape thinking and understanding of disability. She also conducted focus groups with teachers in the UK and the US to understand more about their practices and experiences of using picture books with disability representation within primary school classrooms. Whereas Jill Steele's work was embedded within the animal-assisted education literature, and she examined the potential for reading to dogs to support children's reading attitudes and well-being. Through her project, she explored UK teachers' reading attitudes and experiences of this practice and co-designed and evaluated an online Reading to Dogs programme. And Jill's research was funded by University of Edinburgh Principal's Career Development Scholarship. Meanwhile, Hawla Ahmed's research is exploring how new technologies, specifically augmented reality, may be reshaping children's experiences with books. In her research, she's been examining how AR books may alter children's reading engagement using the multidimensional framework of reading engagement that I shared earlier, looking at behavioral, cognitive, affective, and social engagement. And more recently, she's been studying whether and how AR books may be able to facilitate reading enjoyment and book talk among children with reading difficulties. While Elena Santi's work has been exploring young people's experiences with fiction books, framing her research around the concept of reading as providing a mirror, that is an opportunity to see ourselves reflected in what we read and explore personally meaningful content, a window that is an insight into other people's lives, or as a sliding glass door, an opportunity to become more immersed in the story. Her research is providing new insights into the empowering and enriching effects of fiction book reading for young people as they see and explore different aspects of their identity or develop an improved understanding and empathy towards others. The Growing Up a Reader project is a project which will always have a special place in my heart. As you can see, it was one of our earlier projects before we started working with the talented illustrator, Katie McPherson, and it was actually created on Halloween, which is why it's orange and black. And the Growing Up a Reader project looked at children and young people's conceptualizations of a reader and what it means to be a reader in the 21st century, including why children and young people read different text types. This project marked a significant shift for me in terms of my methodological approach. It was my first qualitative project. It was my first project with a project partner, the Scottish Book Trust, who I've absolutely loved working with since then. And it was intended to be just a really small-scale exploratory project, and yet it's underpinned so much of the work that we've been doing since then. And I'd like to thank the Challenge Investment Fund for funding this and the Neurodiversity and Narrative Fiction project, as they've really been quite integral to our work. And then finally, last but not least, the Writing Lives of Children and Young People. This project is being led by Ross Young and is funded by an ESRC collaborative studentship with the National Literacy Trust. So earlier I shared declines in children and young people's reading enjoyment and engagement, but the UK trend for writing is actually even more striking and concerning. In this project, we are seeking to understand children and young people's motivations for writing through qualitative interview research and secondary data analysis of the National Literacy Trust's annual survey of children and young people's writing. And this is the first project within the lab to focus on writing. So these are just some of the projects that we've been doing over the last few years. I'm sorry that I haven't had an opportunity to share all, but please do have a look at our website if you'd like to see more. We have academic papers, blog posts, recorded talks, co-created resources, pre-registrations, a whole range of things, and for a number of different, not just for researchers, but for teachers and other professionals as well. So in terms of what's next, I think in some ways an inaugural lecture can take different forms. For some, it's an opportunity to reflect on an entire research career, but today I chose to focus only really on work from the last few years. As Carol was saying at the beginning, my career over the last 2 decades has changed considerably. I started off as a cognitive psychologist, really interested in initial reading instruction and the implications of different instructional approaches for children's reading outcomes, but also the implications of these for the strategies children use when reading and the skills underpinning these strategies too. A lot of my work was experimental or longitudinal within nature. And if I'm honest, part of me kind of misses the scientific study of reading. I enjoyed the precision of it and creating and generating and testing my own hypotheses. But I find that qualitative research has really deepened and enriched my understanding of a lot of areas that have always been of interest to me. And qualitative research can also help to develop new lines of inquiry that can then be pursued, if you wish, with quantitative approaches. And over the last year or so, I've also been involved in some exciting discussions with other researchers at the University of Edinburgh. So in particular, Patrick Errington, who's based in English literature. Patrick is a poet and lecturer in creative writing, and he's been leading on future thinking about how to enrich young people's literacy experiences, specifically through poetry engagement. And Dan Merman, an experimental psychologist who's got neuroimaging expertise and has a shared interest in reading and well-being and experiences with narrative. And it's exciting to think about working across different disciplinary perspectives and working with researchers who've got very different methodological approaches. And in terms of my future plans for research, I think my thinking is currently centering around these three different concepts. So engage, empower, and enrich. In terms of engage, I intend to continue my focus on motivating and engaging children, young people, but also adults in literacy activities which are enjoyable, empowering, and enriching for them. I'll always retain a strong interest in books, as I feel that these very strongly that these should be a part of our reading experiences. But I'm also interested in digital activities as well, digital reading activities as well, and how we can motivate an interest in those which may be particularly enriching. In terms of empower, the Neurodiversity and Narrative Fiction Project and the Writing Life Project have led me to come to think about reading and writing as a source of empowerment. I think it's absolutely essential that children and young people receive reading and writing instruction that provides them with the best possible chances of becoming independent and successful learners, so that they have the skills and confidence to use literacy in ways which support their personal goals, their learning, and their lives more generally. However, access to resources is also vital. School and public libraries are absolutely essential to ensure more equitable access to books, but also digital resources. And so research to understand the contribution that libraries can and do make both to our learning and our lives is important. And at the same time, I'm interested in the understanding the impact that books and other texts which reflect the diverse society that we live in can have the extent to which that can have a positive impact on our social and emotional development. And in relation to Enrich, through the Reading and Wellbeing Project, I've come to think about reading as being a source of enrichment. And I'm interested in how we can further enrich lives through literacy. Literacy is not only important for educational outcomes, but for post-school opportunities and economic outcomes as well. And we can think about literacy both as a source of personal, but also collective enrichment as well. So tomorrow I'm actually really excited to be hosting at the University of Edinburgh the Future of Books and Reading event, where we'll be reflecting on these three different themes, bringing together researchers with those in the literacy, library, education, publishing, festivals and museum communities, as we discuss our individual and also shared interests in relation to these three different themes. So I'd like to finish, just give me a second to thank people. I'd like to finish just by thanking all the funders, the organisations, the professionals, the researchers and the colleagues who've been involved in this project. I'd like to give a particular thanks to Teresa Kremen, who's been a wonderful role model and mentor to me over the last few years. A special thanks to my developmental psychology and education colleagues who are absolutely wonderful to work with. I love working with you guys. And also thanks to everyone who, both the academic and professional services team at the Moray House School of Education and Sport, and all of the help that you've had putting into organising this event this evening. I really appreciate it. Just to say, a copy of these slides with access to the links will be available on the website afterwards. If anyone has any questions, there is no time. I'm really sorry. 2 days ago, this talk was almost twice as long, so there's no time for questions, but we can have questions while we're having drinks, hopefully. And if anyone's online, please feel free to put any questions into the chat. These will be collated and read, and I'll actually provide a response to those as I upload the recorded talk afterwards, I promise. And just a final thanks to all of you, whether in the room or joining online, for listening this evening. Thank you.